I was 3 weeks into my new life in Meadowbrook Estates, Arizona, when I learned that some people treat stop signs as suggestions, especially when they're too busy scrolling through HOA violation notices on their phone to pay attention to the road. The crash happened on a Tuesday morning at exactly 7:15. I know the exact time because I just checked my watch, wondering if I had enough time to grab coffee before my shift at the construction site. I was sitting in my 2019 Ford F-150, completely stationary at the four-way stop on Magnolia Drive and Sycamore Lane, when I heard the screech of tires, followed by the sickening crunch of metal on metal. My truck lurched forward as a white Mercedes SUV plowed directly into my rear bumper at what must have been 20 miles per hour. My coffee, which had been sitting peacefully in the cup holder, exploded across my dashboard and lap. I let out a string of curses that would have made my mother wash my mouth out with soap, then threw the truck into park and jumped out to assess the damage. The rear bumper was completely smashed in, the tailgate had a massive dent, and one of my taillights was shattered across the pavement in a spray of red plastic. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone to take pictures, adrenaline flooding my system even though I wasn't hurt. That's when I got my first real look at the driver of the Mercedes. She was already out of her vehicle, a woman probably in her late 40s with an aggressively blonde bob haircut that looked like it cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She wore a crisp white pantsuit that probably cost even more, and her face was twisted into an expression that somehow managed to combine fury and entitlement in equal measure. "What were you thinking, stopping like that?" she shrieked, her voice hitting a pitch that probably had dogs howling 3 blocks away. "You can't just slam on your brakes in the middle of the road." I stared at her, genuinely wondering if she'd hit her head in the accident. "Madam, I was at a stop sign. I was completely stopped. You hit me." "Don't you dare take that tone with me," she snapped, pointing a manicured finger in my direction. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "No, and I don't particularly care," I said, turning back to photograph the damage to my truck. "What I care about is your insurance information because you just destroyed my bumper." She pulled herself up to her full height, which was probably 5'4" in her designer heels. "I am Patricia Wellington, president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, and I will not be spoken to with such disrespect." I paused in the middle of taking a photo. Of course she was HOA. Of course. I'd moved into this planned community in Gilbert, Arizona, 3 weeks ago, lured by the reasonable housing prices and the promise of a quiet neighborhood. The HOA fees were listed as $200 a month, which seemed steep, but not outrageous. What the listing hadn't mentioned was that the HOA was apparently run by someone who considered traffic laws optional. "Mrs. Wellington," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "I'm Yates Ingram. I just moved into 2847 Sycamore Lane, and regardless of who you are, you just rear-ended my truck. We need to exchange insurance information and file a police report." Her face somehow managed to turn an even deeper shade of red. "A police report? Are you insane? Do you want your insurance rates to skyrocket? We can handle this privately within the community." "No," I said firmly. "We're doing this by the book. You hit my stationary vehicle. This is clear cut." I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Patricia's expression cycled through several emotions, finally landing on something that looked like calculated rage. While I waited for the dispatcher to answer, she stomped back to her Mercedes and started taking photos of her own vehicle. The front bumper had some minor damage, nothing compared to what she'd done to my truck, but she was photographing it from every angle like she was documenting a crime scene. The Gilbert Police Department sent an officer within 15 minutes. Officer Rodriguez was a no-nonsense woman in her 30s who took one look at the scene and immediately started taking statements. I explained that I'd been completely stopped at the stop sign when Patricia hit me. Patricia, on the other hand, launched into a rambling explanation about how I'd stopped short, and how my truck was unnecessarily large, and how the whole thing was clearly my fault for not being aware of my surroundings. Officer Rodriguez's expression remained professionally neutral, but I caught the briefest flicker of something that might have been sympathy when she glanced my way. She measured the skid marks, which clearly showed that Patricia had been going way too fast and had only started braking right before impact. She photographed the stop sign, the positions of both vehicles, and the damage. "Mr. Ingram," she said, handing me a copy of the accident report, "you're not at fault here. Mrs. Wellington failed to stop at the stop sign and rear-ended your vehicle. This report will reflect that. Patricia looked like she was about to explode. This is absolutely ridiculous. I have been a pillar of this community for 12 years, and I will not be treated like some common criminal." "Madam," Officer Rodriguez said with admirable patience, "this is a simple traffic accident. No one is treating you like a criminal. You will receive a citation for failure to stop at a stop sign, and you'll need to provide your insurance information to Mr. Ingram." The citation seemed to be the final straw. Patricia snatched the ticket from Officer Rodriguez's hand, then turned to me with eyes that could have melted steel. "You just made a very big mistake, Mr. Ingram. A very big mistake." She climbed back into her Mercedes and drove off, leaving me standing there with a destroyed truck and a sinking feeling in my stomach. Officer Rodriguez gave me an apologetic look. "Word of advice," she said quietly. "I've dealt with Mrs. Wellington before. Document everything. Keep copies of everything, and good luck." That should have been my first real warning, but I was too focused on the immediate problem of my truck. I called a tow truck to take it to a body shop, then called my insurance company to start a claim. They assured me that since I wasn't at fault, Patricia's insurance would cover everything. I'd get a rental car while mine was being repaired and everything would be fine. I wanted to believe them. The next morning, I found the first notice on my door. It was printed on official Meadowbrook Estates HOA letterhead, with Patricia Wellington's name emblazoned at the top as president. The letter was dated the day before the accident, which was interesting timing. "Dear Mr. Ingram," it read in officious language that probably sounded legal to people who didn't know better. "It has come to our attention that your vehicle, a 2019 Ford F-150, license plate number AFB 2847, is not in compliance with Meadowbrook Estates community standards. Specifically, your truck lacks the required reflective safety tape on the rear bumper, as mandated by HOA Regulation 47B, subsection 3, paragraph 12. This is a safety violation and must be corrected within 5 business days, or you will be subject to fines beginning at $50 per day. Additionally, please note that as per HOA regulations, all modifications to vehicles must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee before implementation. Sincerely, Patricia Wellington, HOA President." I read the letter 3 times, each time getting progressively more confused and angry. Reflective safety tape. I'd never heard of such a requirement. I'd bought the house through a real estate agent who'd given me a thick packet of HOA rules and regulations, and I'd actually read through most of it, unlike probably 90% of homeowners. There had been nothing about reflective tape on vehicles. I pulled out the HOA binder from my filing cabinet and started searching. There was Regulation 47B, which dealt with vehicle storage and parking. Subsection 3 was about commercial vehicles and trailers. Paragraph 12 stated, all commercial vehicles over 10,000 pounds that are parked on the street overnight must display appropriate safety markings as required by state law. My truck was not a commercial vehicle. It was not over 10,000 pounds, and I parked it in my driveway, not on the street. This regulation had absolutely nothing to do with me. I was still fuming about it when I got a call from my insurance company. The news was not good. Mr. Ingram, the claims adjuster said, sounding apologetic, Mrs. Wellington's insurance is denying the claim. They're saying that you're partially at fault for the accident because your vehicle was not in compliance with local safety regulations. What? I nearly dropped my phone. That's insane. I was stopped at a stop sign. She hit me. The police report clearly states that. I understand your frustration, sir. We're going to fight this, but it's going to take time. In the meantime, you're going to have to pay your deductible to get your truck repaired, and we'll try to recover it from her insurance later. My deductible was $1,000. $1,000 I'd have to pay because Patricia Wellington couldn't be bothered to watch the road while driving. I called the body shop and authorized the repairs, then spent the rest of the day trying to work off my anger by organizing my garage. It didn't help much. The second notice arrived the next day. This one was even better. Dear Mr. Ingram, due to the accident that occurred on Tuesday, March 18th, at the intersection of Magnolia Drive and Sycamore Lane, the Meadowbrook Estates HOA is billing you for damage to community property. Your non-compliant vehicle caused debris to scatter across the intersection, requiring additional cleanup and maintenance. Please remit payment of $275 within 10 business days. Additionally, your continued non-compliance with HOA Regulation 47B regarding reflective safety tape has now exceeded the grace period. You are hereby assessed a fine of $50 per day, beginning March 19th. As of today, your total outstanding balance is $375. Sincerely, Patricia Wellington, HOA President. I actually laughed when I read it. It was either that or put my fist through a wall, and I just bought this house. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. She'd crashed into my truck and now she was billing me for it. I drafted an email to the HOA board. According to the documents I'd received when I bought the house, the board consisted of 5 members. Patricia Wellington as president, someone named George Chen as vice president, Margaret Foster as treasurer, David Kim as secretary, and Linda Martinez as a member at large. I addressed it to all of them. Dear HOA board members, I wrote, keeping my tone as professional as I could manage. I am writing to dispute the fines and charges outlined in the notices dated March 19th and March 20th. First, regarding the reflective tape requirement, I have carefully reviewed HOA Regulation 47B, subsection 3, paragraph 12, and it applies only to commercial vehicles over 10,000 pounds parked on the street. My vehicle is a personal truck weighing approximately 5,000 pounds, parked in my driveway. This regulation does not apply to my situation. Second, regarding the cleanup fees, I was not at fault for the accident on March 18th, as clearly documented in the police report. Mrs. Wellington rear-ended my stationary vehicle after failing to stop at a stop sign. Any debris that resulted from the accident was a direct result of her negligence, not mine. I request that all fines and charges be immediately rescinded. Sincerely, Yates Ingram, 2847 Sycamore Lane. I sent the email feeling somewhat better. At least I was taking action instead of just stewing about it. The response came within an hour. It was from Patricia Wellington only, not the full board. Mr. Ingram, your interpretation of HOA regulations is incorrect. The board has the authority to enforce community standards as we see fit, and we have determined that your vehicle poses a safety risk to the community. The fines stand. As for the accident, the HOA has conducted its own investigation and determined that both parties share responsibility. The cleanup fees stand. Payment is due within the stated time frame, or additional penalties will apply. Patricia Wellington, HOA President. I read the email twice, then forwarded it to my real estate agent with a note asking if she knew a good real estate attorney. Then I started doing research. It turned out that Arizona HOAs were granted significant powers under state law, but those powers weren't unlimited. They had to follow their own governing documents. They had to give homeowners due process, and they couldn't just make up rules on the fly. The problem was that fighting an HOA required time and money, two things that were in short supply for a guy who worked construction and had just depleted his savings account for a down payment on a house. My real estate agent called me back that evening. Her name was Sandra, and she sounded genuinely concerned. "Yates, I'm so sorry you're dealing with this. I've heard Patricia Wellington's name before, and it's never in a good context. I'm going to give you the number for Tom Reynolds. He's a real estate attorney who handles HOA disputes. The consultation is free, so at least talk to him." I called Tom Reynolds the next morning. He listened to my story, asked a few questions, and then gave me the kind of news that I was starting to expect. "Mr. Ingram, you've got a clear case of HOA overreach here. The regulation she's citing doesn't apply to you, and billing you for an accident she caused is absurd. The problem is that taking this to court is going to cost you at least $5,000 in legal fees, probably more. For what she's charging you right now, it's almost cheaper to just pay the fines." "But that's insane," I protested. "She can't just get away with this." "She can and she does," Tom said with a sigh. "I've seen it 100 times. HOA presidents who abuse their power because they know most homeowners can't afford to fight back. Your best bet is to try to work with the other board members. Get them to override her decisions. Do you know any of them?" I didn't, but I decided that was about to change. Over the next 2 days, I managed to track down contact information for all the other board members. George Chen lived 3 streets over, and I caught him washing his car on Saturday morning. "George," I called out as I approached, "I'm Yates Ingram. I live on Sycamore Lane. Do you have a minute?" George was a thin man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and a cautious expression. "What can I do for you?" I explained the situation as clearly and factually as I could. The accident, the absurd fines, the misapplication of the HOA regulation. George listened with an increasingly uncomfortable expression. "Look," he said when I finished, "I know Patricia can be a bit enthusiastic about enforcement, but she's been president for 6 years and she knows the regulations inside and out." "But the regulation doesn't apply to me," I said, pulling out a printed copy of the rule. "Look at it. It's right here. Commercial vehicles over 10,000 pounds. George studied the paper, then sighed. "You're probably right, but Patricia doesn't like to be challenged. If I go against her on this, she'll make my life miserable. I'm sorry, but I have to live here too." He went back to washing his car, and I walked away feeling like I just watched someone choose to enable a bully because it was easier than standing up to them. Margaret Foster, the treasurer, didn't even open her door when I knocked. She shouted through it that she didn't get involved in board disputes and that I should take it up with Patricia. David Kim at least had the decency to seem apologetic. He was a younger guy, maybe in his 30s, who worked from home doing something with computers. We talked on his front porch while his 2 kids played in the yard. "Man, I feel for you," he said. "Patricia pulled something similar with me last year. Said my fence was 2 inches too tall and fined me $500. I fought it for 3 months and eventually just paid because the stress wasn't worth it. The rest of the board is too scared to challenge her." "Why do people keep voting her in as president?" I asked. David laughed bitterly. "Nobody runs against her. She controls the nominating committee, and she makes life hell for anyone who opposes her. Last guy who tried to run against her suddenly got hit with thousands of dollars in violations for ridiculous things. His mailbox was the wrong shade of black. His grass was a 1/4 inch too tall. His house number wasn't reflective enough. He ended up selling his house and moving away. That's insane. That's Patricia Wellington. Linda Martinez was my last hope, and I found her working in her garden on Sunday afternoon. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and dirt under her fingernails. "You must be Yates," she said before I even introduced myself. "I heard about the accident. Patricia mentioned it at our last board meeting." "She did. What did she say?" Linda stood up and brushed dirt off her knees. "She said that a new resident had deliberately stopped short to cause an accident, and that his vehicle was illegally modified and presented a safety hazard to the community. I'm guessing that's not the whole story." I showed her everything. The police report, the photos of the accident scene, the actual text of the HOA regulation, the ridiculous fines. Linda looked through it all with a deepening frown. "This is bad," she said finally. "This is really bad. Patricia has always been aggressive with enforcement, but this crosses a line. She's using the HOA to retaliate against you for reporting the accident to the police. Can you help me? Can the board override her?" Linda was quiet for a long moment. "It would take 3 board members to call a special meeting and vote to rescind the fines. In theory, I could get George and David to support it, but Patricia will fight back hard. She has ways of making people's lives miserable." "I've heard, but this isn't right. She can't just be allowed to do this." Linda nodded slowly. "You're right. Give me a few days. Let me talk to some people." I left feeling a tiny spark of hope, but it was quickly extinguished by what I found when I got home. There was another notice on my door. "Dear Mr. Ingram, it has come to our attention that you have been soliciting board members at their private residences. This constitutes harassment under HOA Regulation 23C and is grounds for additional fines. Furthermore, your continued non-compliance with vehicle safety requirements has now resulted in a total outstanding balance of $625. Please note that if payment is not received within 5 business days, the HOA will place a lien on your property. Sincerely, Patricia Wellington, HOA President." A lien. She was threatening to place a lien on my house, which I'd owned for less than a month, over fines that were completely bogus. I felt my hands shaking as I held the letter. I called Tom Reynolds again. "Can she do this? Can she actually put a lien on my property?" "Unfortunately, yes," Tom said. "Arizona law gives HOAs the power to place liens for unpaid fines and fees. Once the lien is in place, they can eventually foreclose on your property if the debt isn't paid. It's an extreme measure, but it's legal." "So I have to pay?" "Not necessarily. You can request a hearing before the board. They're required to give you due process before placing a lien. The problem is that Patricia controls the board, so a hearing might not do you much good." "This is America," I said, hearing the frustration in my own voice. "How is this legal? How can one person have this much power?" "Because most state legislatures are filled with people who own property in HOAs and sit on HOA boards themselves," Tom said bluntly. "They're not going to pass laws that restrict their own power. Look, Yates, I'm going to give you some free advice. Start documenting everything. Every interaction with Patricia, every notice, every email. Take photos, keep records. If this escalates, you're going to need evidence. I spent Sunday evening creating a detailed timeline of everything that had happened. The accident, the notices, the conversations with board members, all of it. I scanned every document and backed everything up to the cloud. If Patricia Wellington wanted a fight, I was going to be prepared. Monday morning, I woke up to find that my truck had been towed from my driveway. I stood in my empty driveway in my pajamas, coffee mug in hand, staring at the space where my truck should have been. My truck, which had just gotten back from the body shop on Friday. My truck, which had been legally parked in my own driveway on my own property. I called the Gilbert Police Department, and they had no record of towing my vehicle. I called every tow company in the area, and finally found one that confirmed they'd towed a Ford F-150 from my address at 6 that morning. Who authorized the tow? I demanded. The HOA, the dispatcher said. We have a contract with Meadowbrook Estates to tow vehicles that are in violation of community standards. It was in my driveway, sir. I'm just telling you what I know. If you want to dispute it, you'll need to talk to your HOA. The vehicle is in our impound lot. The fee is $250 plus $50 per day storage. I hung up and immediately called Patricia Wellington. She answered on the third ring, and I could practically hear the smugness in her voice. Mr. Ingram, I was expecting your call. You had my truck towed from my own driveway, I said, trying to keep my voice level and failing. That's theft. That's enforcement, she corrected. Your vehicle was in violation of community standards, and after multiple warnings, the HOA exercised its right to remove the offending vehicle from the property. You can't tow a vehicle from someone's private driveway. Actually, according to the CC and Articus that you signed when you purchased your property, the HOA has the right to enter your property and remove any items that violate community standards after proper notice has been given. You were given proper notice. The vehicle was removed. If you want it back, you'll need to pay the impound fees and the outstanding HOA fines, which now total $875. I took a deep breath, trying not to say something I'd regret. Mrs. Wellington, you crashed into my truck. The police report clearly states that you were at fault. You are now harassing me and making up violations to retaliate against me for reporting the accident. This is illegal. I have no idea what you're talking about, she said in a tone that suggested she knew exactly what I was talking about. The HOA is simply enforcing the rules that all residents agreed to follow. If you have a problem with that, you're welcome to request a hearing before the board. The next meeting is in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. I need my truck now. I need it for work. Then I suggest you pay your fines, Mr. Ingram. Have a nice day. She hung up. I stood there holding my phone, so angry that I couldn't see straight. Then I did what I probably should have done days ago. I called the Gilbert Police Department and asked to file a report for harassment. The officer who took my statement was sympathetic, but not particularly helpful. Mr. Ingram, this sounds like a civil dispute between you and your HOA. Unless there's been a threat of physical violence or destruction of property, there's not much we can do from a criminal standpoint. She had my truck towed from my own driveway. If the HOA has the authority to do that under your CC and Articus, then it's not theft. It's a civil matter. You'd need to take it to court. I thanked him and hung up, feeling completely defeated. I called my boss to explain that I didn't have a vehicle and wouldn't be able to make it to the job site. He was understanding, but pointed out that I was on a crew that required everyone to have reliable transportation. If I couldn't get to work, he'd have to replace me. I couldn't afford to lose my job. I also couldn't afford to pay $875 in bogus fines. And I definitely couldn't afford the $5,000 in legal fees it would take to fight this in court. I was trapped, and Patricia Wellington knew it. I sat down at my kitchen table and tried to think rationally. I needed my truck. That was the immediate priority. I could pay the impound fees and get the truck back, which would cost at least $250. But Patricia would just have it towed again, unless I either paid the HOA fines or got the fines rescinded. Linda Martinez had said she would try to help. I decided to give her a call. She answered on the second ring and listened as I explained about the towing. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said finally. "This has gone too far. I talked to David yesterday and he's willing to stand up to Patricia. George is still on the fence, but I think we can convince him. The problem is that we need to call a special board meeting, and that requires 3 board members to request it in writing. How long does that take? The bylaws require 72 hours notice to all board members, so we could have a meeting by Thursday at the earliest." "I need my truck before then. I need it for work," Linda sighed. "I know. Look, I'm going to try something. Give me an hour." She hung up before I could ask what she meant. I spent the next hour pacing around my house, checking my phone every 30 seconds, and mentally calculating how long I could survive without a paycheck. Linda called back 55 minutes later. "Okay, I talked to Patricia. I told her that I was going to call a special board meeting to address your situation, and that I had the votes to overturn her decisions. I also told her that if she didn't back down, I was going to start looking into some of the other enforcement actions she's taken over the past year, because I think there might be a pattern of abuse of power." "What did she say?" "She's agreed to suspend the towing pending the board meeting. She won't rescind the fines yet, but at least you can get your truck back without her immediately having it towed again. You'll still have to pay the impound fees, though. It wasn't perfect, but it was something." I thanked Linda profusely and immediately called the tow company to arrange to pick up my truck. The impound fee was $250, exactly as they'd quoted. I paid it with a credit card, wincing at the charge, and drove my truck home. The next 3 days were tense. I went to work, came home, and waited for the other shoe to drop. I documented everything, just like Tom Reynolds had suggested. I took photos of my truck in my driveway every morning and evening, showing that it was properly parked and not in violation of any legitimate rules. On Thursday evening, the special board meeting convened in the clubhouse at the community center. I arrived 15 minutes early and found Linda, David, and George already there, sitting at a table at the front of the room. Patricia arrived exactly on time, wearing another expensive pantsuit and an expression that could have curdled milk. "This special meeting is out of order," she announced before even sitting down. "The request didn't follow proper procedures." "Yes, it did," Linda said calmly, pulling out a copy of the bylaws. Section 8, Paragraph 3. Any 3 board members may call a special meeting by providing written notice to all board members at least 72 hours in advance. David, George, and I submitted our written request on Monday at 5 p.m. It's now Thursday at 7 p.m. That's more than 72 hours. Patricia's jaw tightened, but she sat down. "Fine. Let's get this farce over with." Linda took charge of the meeting, which seemed to annoy Patricia even more. "We're here to discuss the fines and enforcement actions taken against Yates Ingram of 2847 Sycamore Lane. Mr. Ingram, would you like to present your case?" I stood up, my notes trembling slightly in my hands. There were about a dozen other residents in the room, neighbors who'd apparently heard about the meeting and wanted to see what would happen. "Thank you," I said. On March 18th, I was stopped at a stop sign when Mrs. Wellington rear-ended my truck. The police report clearly states that she was at fault. Since then, I've received multiple notices claiming that my truck is in violation of HOA regulations, specifically regarding reflective safety tape. I've reviewed the actual regulation, and it applies only to commercial vehicles over 10,000 pounds parked on the street. My truck is a personal vehicle weighing approximately 5,000 pounds, and it's parked in my driveway. The regulation doesn't apply to me. I passed out copies of the regulation and the police report to each board member. Patricia didn't even look at hers. Furthermore, I continued, I've been billed for cleanup costs from the accident, even though I wasn't at fault. I've been fined for speaking to board members, which is characterized as harassment, even though I was simply exercising my right as a homeowner to communicate with the board. And my vehicle was towed from my own driveway, costing me $250 in impound fees. All of this appears to be retaliation for reporting the accident to the police. I sat down. My heart was pounding, but I felt like I'd made my case clearly. Patricia stood up. Mr. Ingram's interpretation of the regulations is incorrect. As HOA president, I have the authority to interpret regulations as needed to maintain community standards. His truck is oversized and lacks proper safety features. The fines are appropriate and will stand. Show me where in the bylaws it says you have unilateral authority to reinterpret regulations, Linda said. I've been president for 6 years, Patricia snapped. I know what I'm doing. That's not an answer, David interjected, speaking up for the first time. I've been reviewing the regulations too, and Yates is right. That rule doesn't apply to him. We can't fine him for something he's not actually violating. George cleared his throat nervously. I agree. I think we need to rescind the fines. Patricia's face turned red. You're all making a huge mistake. Mr. Ingram is disruptive and disrespectful, and he's setting a dangerous precedent by questioning HOA authority. No, Linda said firmly. You're the one who's setting a dangerous precedent by abusing your authority. I move that we rescind all fines and charges against Yates Ingram related to the vehicle violations and the accident cleanup. Second, David said immediately. All in favor? Linda asked. Linda, David, and George all raised their hands. Patricia glared at them, her hand firmly down. Motion passes, Linda said. Mr. Ingram, your fines are rescinded. Additionally, I move that we reimburse you for the impound fees that you had to pay as a result of the improper towing. Second, George said. The vote was the same, 3-1 with Patricia as the only dissenting vote. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It wasn't everything. Patricia still hadn't taken responsibility for the accident or paid for the damage to my truck, but at least the harassment was over. Patricia stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. I resign from this board, effective immediately. You've all lost sight of what's important, and I won't be part of this disaster. She grabbed her purse and stormed out of the room. The door slammed behind her with enough force to rattle the windows. Linda, David, and George looked at each other in surprise. Then Linda started laughing. Well, she said, I guess that solves that problem. The meeting wrapped up shortly after. Several neighbors came up to thank me for standing up to Patricia, and more than one person mentioned that they'd been hit with questionable fines over the years, but had been too afraid to fight back. I exchanged phone numbers with Linda and David, and we agreed to stay in touch. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in days. The nightmare was over. Patricia had resigned, the fines were gone, and I could finally move on with my life. I should have known it wouldn't be that easy. The next morning, I woke up to my phone ringing at 6 a.m. It was Linda Martinez, and she sounded panicked. "Yates, I'm so sorry. I just got an email from Patricia's lawyer. She's suing you for defamation." I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. "What?" "She's claiming that you made false statements about her at the board meeting, damaging her reputation in the community. The lawsuit is for $50,000. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. But I didn't say anything false. Everything I said was documented, I know. But she's suing you anyway. I think she's just trying to intimidate you into backing down." I called Tom Reynolds as soon as his office opened. He listened to the situation and let out a low whistle. "Okay, this is what we call a SLAPP suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation. It's designed to silence you by burying you in legal fees. The good news is that Arizona has anti-SLAPP statutes that can get the case dismissed. The bad news is that you still need to respond to the lawsuit, which means you need a lawyer. How much is this going to cost?" "I can handle it for you. Given the circumstances, I'll do it for a flat fee of $3,000. If we win, which we should, we can try to recover attorney's fees from Patricia." $3,000 I didn't have. But not responding to the lawsuit would result in a default judgment, which would be even worse. I agreed to hire Tom and figured I'd put it on a credit card and worry about paying it off later. Over the next 2 weeks, Tom filed a motion to dismiss under Arizona's anti-SLAPP statute. He argued that my statements at the board meeting were protected speech regarding a matter of public concern, and that Patricia couldn't prove they were false or made with malice. He attached copies of the police report, the HOA regulations, and the board meeting minutes. Patricia's lawyer responded with a rambling brief that seemed to be based more on emotion than law. It claimed that I had viciously attacked Patricia's character and that she had suffered severe emotional distress as a result of my lies. The hearing was scheduled for April 15th in Maricopa County Superior Court. I took the day off work and met Tom at the courthouse. Patricia was there with her lawyer, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit who probably charged $500 an hour. The judge, a woman in her 50s named Judge Martha Brennan, reviewed the motions and heard brief arguments from both sides. She asked Patricia's lawyer to point to any specific statement I'd made that was demonstrably false. He couldn't do it. He tried to argue that my tone and implications were defamatory, but Judge Brennan cut him off. "Counselor, defamation requires a false statement of fact. Tone and implications aren't enough. Can you point to a single factual statement that Mr. Ingram made that was false?" Patricia's lawyer flipped through his notes, then through the board meeting minutes. Finally, he said, "Your Honor, Mr. Ingram stated that my client rear-ended his vehicle. But my client's version of events is that Mr. Ingram stopped short, making her unable to avoid the collision." "That's a disputed fact." Judge Brennan looked unimpressed. "The police report states that Mrs. Wellington was at fault for failing to stop at a stop sign. Do you have any evidence to contradict that?" "The police report is just one officer's opinion. It's an official police report based on physical evidence at the scene. Mr. Ingram's statement that Mrs. Wellington rear-ended his vehicle is supported by the police report and is therefore not defamatory. Do you have any other false statements to point to?" Patricia's lawyer tried a few more times, arguing that my claim about retaliation was false and defamatory. But Tom had the paper trail, the timeline showing that the fine started immediately after I reported the accident, the misapplication of the HOA regulations, the towing that occurred after I spoke to board members. It was all there in black and white. Judge Brennan made her ruling from the bench. "This is clearly a SLAPP suit designed to punish Mr. Ingram for exercising his right to participate in HOA governance. the motion to dismiss is granted. Furthermore, under Arizona's anti-SLAPP statute, Mr. Ingram is entitled to recover his attorney's fees. Mrs. Wellington, you will be responsible for paying Mr. Ingram's legal costs. The court will also note that filing frivolous lawsuits to silence legitimate criticism is an abuse of the legal system. Patricia looked like she was going to explode. Her lawyer tried to argue, but Judge Brennan had already made up her mind. The case was dismissed, and Patricia was ordered to pay my attorney's fees within 30 days. I walked out of the courthouse feeling vindicated. Tom was grinning. "That went about as well as it could have gone," he said. "You'll get your $3,000 back, plus you've got a judgment against her. If she doesn't pay, we can put a lien on her property." The irony was not lost on me, but Patricia Wellington wasn't done yet. Over the next week, I started hearing stories from other neighbors. Apparently, Patricia had been going door to door in the neighborhood, telling people that I was dangerous and disruptive, that I'd verbally abused her, and that I was planning to sue the HOA for millions of dollars. She was campaigning to get me kicked out of the neighborhood. It didn't work. Most people had heard about the board meeting and the lawsuit, and they'd formed their own opinions. More than one neighbor stopped by my house to offer support and to share their own stories of Patricia's bullying over the years. Then things took a darker turn. On April 22nd, I came home from work to find my mailbox had been smashed in. It looked like someone had taken a baseball bat to it. I filed a police report, but there was no evidence of who had done it. 3 days later, my tires were slashed. All 4 of them, sliced deep enough that they were completely unsalvageable. Another police report, another dead end. I installed a security camera on my front porch, angled to cover my driveway and the street. It was a cheap one from Amazon, but it had motion detection and night vision. I hoped it would be enough to catch whoever was doing this. On April 28th, the camera caught something. At 2:15 in the morning, a white Mercedes SUV drove slowly past my house. I couldn't see the license plate clearly, but I could see the driver, a blonde woman who looked an awful lot like Patricia Wellington. She didn't stop or do anything, just drove past slowly like she was casing the place. But it was enough to make me nervous. I sent the video to Officer Rodriguez at the Gilbert Police Department with a note explaining the situation. She called me back later that day. "Mr. Ingram, I watched the video. I can't definitively identify the driver, and she didn't actually do anything illegal by driving past your house. But I'm going to note this in the report about your vandalism. If anything else happens, we'll have a pattern documented. Is there anything I can do to protect myself? Keep the cameras running. Document everything, and be careful. If you feel threatened, call 911 immediately." I upgraded my security system, adding cameras to cover the backyard and side of the house. I also started parking my truck in the garage instead of the driveway, just to make it harder for someone to damage it. May started quietly, and I began to hope that maybe Patricia had finally given up. The HOA had elected Linda Martinez as the new president, and things in the neighborhood seemed to be calming down. I still got the occasional dirty look from a few of Patricia's friends, but for the most part, life was getting back to normal. Then, on May 7th, Patricia paid her attorney's fees. Tom called to let me know that the check had been received and cleared. $3,000 plus the court costs. It felt good to have that money back in my account. "That should be the end of it," Tom said. "She's paid what she owes, the case is closed, and legally she can't do anything else to you." I wanted to believe him, but something told me that Patricia Wellington wasn't the type to let things go. I was right. On May 10th, I received a notice from the Gilbert Police Department. Patricia Wellington had filed for a restraining order against me, claiming that I was stalking and harassing her. I stared at the notice in disbelief. The hearing was scheduled for May 18th. According to the petition, I had allegedly repeatedly driven past her house, made threatening phone calls, sent harassing emails, and caused her to fear for her safety. None of it was true. I'd never driven past her house. I'd never called her except for the one time right after my truck was towed, and the only emails I'd sent were the ones disputing the HOA fines, all of which were documented and professional. I called Tom Reynolds again. He was starting to sound as tired of this as I felt. "She's escalating," he said. "This is harassment, plain and simple. We'll fight it, but you need to understand that restraining order hearings have a lower burden of proof than regular court cases. A judge can grant a temporary order based on her testimony alone, even without hard evidence. But I haven't done anything. I know, and we'll prove that. But in the meantime, you need to be extra careful. Don't go anywhere near her house. Don't try to contact her in any way, and document where you are and what you're doing as much as possible." The next week was stressful. I made sure to keep receipts from everywhere I went. I stayed completely away from Patricia Street, which was on the other side of the neighborhood, and I kept my security cameras running constantly. The hearing was held in Gilbert Municipal Court. Patricia showed up looking distraught, wearing minimal makeup and a conservative dress, playing the role of the frightened victim. She took the stand and testified that I had been harassing her for weeks, that she'd seen my truck driving past her house multiple times, and that she'd received threatening phone calls from my number. Tom Cross examined her thoroughly. "Mrs. Wellington, you claim that Mr. Ingram has driven past your house multiple times. Do you have any video evidence of this?" "No, but I know what I saw." "Do you have any witnesses who can corroborate that they saw Mr. Ingram's truck near your house?" "My husband saw it once." "Is your husband here to testify?" "No, he had to work." Tom pulled out phone records. "You claim that Mr. Ingram called you multiple times. These are his phone records for the past 2 months. There's one call to your number on March 20th at 9:37 a.m., lasting 4 minutes. That's the day his truck was towed. Are you saying there were other calls?" Patricia hesitated. "I received calls from blocked numbers, but you can't prove they were from Mr. Ingram. I know it was him." Tom then presented my evidence. My work schedule showing that I was at job sites on the days Patricia claimed I was driving past her house. The security camera footage showing my truck in my garage or driveway during the times she claimed I was harassing her, and the lack of any emails or communications from me to her, except for the original dispute about the HOA fines. The judge, a no-nonsense man named Judge Robert Pierce, looked skeptical. "Mrs. Wellington, do you have any concrete evidence that Mr. Ingram has contacted you or come near your property since the board meeting on March 21st? "I know what I've experienced, Your Honor." "That's not an answer." "Do you have any evidence?" "No, but I feel threatened." Judge Pierce reviewed the documents in front of him. "Mrs. Wellington, it appears to me that you are attempting to use the restraining order process to continue a dispute that has already been resolved through proper channels. Mr. Ingram has provided substantial evidence that he has not been anywhere near your property or contacted you in any way. The petition for a restraining order is denied." Patricia's face crumpled and she started crying. "This isn't fair. He's ruined my life. I had to resign from the HOA board because of him." "You chose to resign, madam. That was your decision. This hearing is concluded." I walked out of the courthouse with Tom, feeling exhausted but relieved. "Is it finally over, maybe?" Tom said. But Yates, I have to tell you, Patricia Wellington is showing signs of serious obsession. People like this don't always give up, even when the legal system tells them they're wrong. Be careful. His words turned out to be prophetic. For the next 2 weeks, things were quiet. Too quiet. I kept my cameras running and stayed alert, but Patricia seemed to have finally backed off. Then, on May 29th, everything exploded. I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of breaking glass. I bolted out of bed and looked out my window to see flames. My truck, parked in my driveway because my garage was full of boxes I hadn't unpacked yet, was on fire. I called 911, grabbed my fire extinguisher, and ran outside in my pajamas. By the time I got there, the flames had engulfed the entire front of the truck. My little fire extinguisher was useless against the inferno. I backed away as the fire spread to the interior, watching helplessly as my truck was destroyed for the second time in 2 months. The Gilbert Fire Department arrived within minutes. They put out the fire quickly, but the damage was total. The truck was a burned-out shell, completely unsalvageable. While the firefighters were working, I ran back inside and checked my security cameras. The footage was clear. At 2:58 a.m., a figure in dark clothing and a hoodie had approached my truck, done something near the gas tank, and then run away. 30 seconds later, flames had erupted. The fire investigator reviewed the footage with me. "That's arson," he said grimly. "Clear as day." "I'm calling the police." Officer Rodriguez arrived and took over the investigation. She watched the security footage multiple times, then looked at me seriously. "Can you identify who that is? The hood is covering their face, but look at the build and the way they move. And look at this." I pointed to the end of the footage, where the figure ran to a car parked down the street. "That's a white Mercedes SUV." Officer Rodriguez zoomed in on the image. The license plate was partially visible. She ran it through her system and looked up at me. "That's registered to Patricia Wellington. She set my truck on fire. We'll need more evidence to prove that she was the one who actually set the fire, but this gives us probable cause to bring her in for questioning." By the time the sun came up, my driveway was a crime scene. The fire investigator confirmed that an accelerant had been used, poured near the gas tank. This wasn't vandalism that had gone too far. This was deliberate, premeditated arson. Detective James Murphy from the Gilbert Police Department took over the case. He was a serious man in his 40s who looked like he'd seen everything and wasn't impressed by any of it. He interviewed me about the entire history with Patricia, taking detailed notes. "So she crashed into your truck, tried to bill you for it, had it towed, sued you, tried to get a restraining order, and now she's allegedly burned it," he summarized. "That's quite an escalation. Is there enough evidence to arrest her? The vehicle in the footage is registered to her." "That's enough for probable cause. We'll bring her in, search her vehicle for evidence of accelerant, and see if her alibi holds up. Given the time of the fire, she'd have to explain where she was at 3 a.m. Detective Murphy and 2 other officers went to Patricia's house at 9 a.m. I wasn't there, but I heard about it later from Linda Martinez, who lived close enough to see the police cars. Patricia answered the door in her bathrobe and initially refused to let the officers in. When they explained that they had a warrant to search her vehicle, she became hysterical, screaming that I had framed her and that this was all a conspiracy. The search of her Mercedes SUV turned up a gas can in the trunk. The can was mostly empty, but it still had traces of gasoline in it. More importantly, Patricia's shoes, which were sitting in her garage, tested positive for gasoline residue. She was arrested and charged with arson, a Class 4 felony in Arizona. She was also charged with criminal damage, since the truck was valued at over $25,000. She made bail the next day, but the damage to her reputation was done. The story spread through Meadowbrook Estates like wildfire. No pun intended. The former HOA president, who had spent years nitpicking everyone's lawn height and mailbox color, had been arrested for burning her neighbor's truck. It was the biggest scandal the neighborhood had ever seen. My insurance company was understanding about the situation. Since the arson was documented and Patricia had been arrested, they treated it as a criminal act rather than a regular claim. They cut me a check for the full value of the truck, and I used it to buy a new one, this time a 2020 Chevrolet Silverado. Over the next few months, the criminal case against Patricia moved forward. Her lawyer tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial, but the combination of the security footage, the gas can in her trunk, and the gasoline residue on her shoes was damning. The prosecutor also brought in evidence of the entire history between us, showing a pattern of escalating harassment and retaliation. In August, faced with overwhelming evidence, Patricia took a plea deal. She pled guilty to 1 count of arson and 1 count of criminal damage. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 2 years. She was also ordered to pay restitution for the full value of my truck, plus all the other costs I'd incurred, including the impound fees, the attorney's fees for the defamation case, and the deductible I'd paid after the original accident. The total came to $32,000. I had no idea how she was going to pay it, and honestly, I didn't care. The money was secondary to the fact that she was finally being held accountable for her actions. The civil case for the original accident finally settled too. Patricia's insurance, faced with the criminal conviction and the police report, agreed to pay for all damages from the accident, including my deductible. It was a small victory, but it felt good to finally have that resolved. Life in Meadowbrook Estates slowly returned to normal. Linda Martinez continued as HOA president and implemented a series of reforms to prevent another Patricia Wellington situation from happening. The board changed the bylaws to require approval from at least 3 board members before any enforcement action could be taken, and they created an appeals process for homeowners who felt they'd been unfairly fined. I unpacked the rest of my boxes, set up my house the way I wanted it, and started to feel like I actually lived there instead of just camping out. I became friends with several of my neighbors, including David Kim and his family. His kids liked to play basketball in their driveway, and sometimes I'd join them for a game. In October, I got a letter from Patricia's lawyer. She had filed for bankruptcy from prison, and the restitution order was being discharged. I wasn't going to get the $32,000 she owed me. I called Tom Reynolds to ask about it. Can she do that? Can she just declare bankruptcy and not pay? Unfortunately, yes, Tom said. Restitution orders can sometimes be discharged in bankruptcy, depending on the circumstances. You could fight it, but it would cost more in legal fees than you'd recover. She probably doesn't have any assets left anyway. It stung, but I'd already replaced my truck and moved on with my life. The money would have been nice, but it wasn't worth dragging this out any longer. I wrote it off and decided to be done with Patricia Wellington forever. A year after the accident, I was still living in Meadowbrook Estates. My house had appreciated in value. The neighborhood was peaceful under Linda's leadership, and I'd even started dating a woman named Nicole Webster, who lived a few streets over and worked as a teacher at the local elementary school. Life was good. I sometimes thought about Patricia Wellington and wondered how she was doing in prison. I didn't feel sorry for her exactly, but I did think about how differently things could have gone if she just admitted fault for the accident and let her insurance handle it like a normal person. Instead, she'd let her pride and her need for control destroy her life. The case became something of a cautionary tale in HOA circles. Tom Reynolds told me that he'd started using my story in presentations to other HOA boards, warning them about the dangers of giving too much unchecked power to a single person. Several HOA management companies in Arizona started implementing new oversight procedures as a result. I guess, if nothing else, my nightmare had prevented other people from going through the same thing. That felt like a small win. In December, I got an unexpected visitor. A woman in her 20s knocked on my door and introduced herself as Emily Wellington, Patricia's daughter. I'd had no idea Patricia even had a daughter. "Mr. Ingram," she said, looking nervous, "I wanted to apologize for what my mother did to you. I know an apology doesn't fix anything, but I needed to say it anyway. She's not well. She hasn't been well for a long time, and I should have done more to get her help." I invited her in and made coffee. We talked for over an hour. Emily explained that Patricia had been getting increasingly unstable for years. After her husband left her 3 years ago, she'd thrown herself into the HOA as a way to feel important and in control. The more power she had, the more paranoid and vindictive she became. Emily had tried to get her mother to see a therapist, but Patricia refused, insisting that everyone else was the problem. When she got arrested, Emily said, "I was almost relieved. I thought maybe it would finally be the wake-up call she needed, but she still doesn't think she did anything wrong. She thinks you framed her, that the police are corrupt, that the whole system is against her." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "I never wanted any of this to happen. I just wanted her to take responsibility for hitting my truck. I know, and for what it's worth, I'm glad you stood up to her. Someone needed to, and everyone else in this neighborhood was too scared." Emily stood to leave. "I'm making sure she gets mental health treatment in prison. Maybe it will help, maybe it won't, but I wanted you to know that not everyone in my family is like her." After she left, I sat on my couch for a long time, thinking. The whole situation had been so absurd, so unnecessary. A simple fender bender had escalated into arson and a prison sentence, all because one person couldn't admit they were wrong. I thought about all the HOAs across America, all the little fiefdoms run by people who got drunk on the tiniest bit of power. How many other Patricia Wellingtons were out there, making people's lives miserable over mailbox colors and grass height? How many people were being bullied into silence because they couldn't afford to fight back? The system was broken. I'd been lucky to have neighbors who stood up with me, to have a lawyer who took my case, to have security cameras that caught Patricia in the act. But what about people who didn't have those advantages? They just had to suffer in silence or give up their homes. Something needed to change. I started researching Arizona HOA law, reading up on reform efforts, and connecting with other homeowners who'd had similar experiences. There was a whole community of people fighting back against HOA abuse, and they were making slow but steady progress. I testified before the Arizona State Legislature in February, telling my story to a committee considering HOA reform legislation. The bill proposed stricter oversight of HOA boards, better dispute resolution mechanisms, and penalties for board members who abused their power. It didn't pass that session, but the committee chairman told me they'd keep working on it. By March, 2 years after the accident, I'd become something of an accidental activist. I gave talks to neighborhood groups, wrote articles about HOA reform, and helped other homeowners navigate disputes with their associations. It wasn't what I'd planned when I moved to Meadowbrook Estates, but it gave me a sense of purpose. Nicole thought it was funny that I'd become the neighborhood HOA guy. "You know," she said one evening as we sat on my patio, "most people try to avoid getting involved with their HOA. You've made it your second career. Someone has to do it," I said, "and I've got the experience." "You've got the battle scars, you mean." She wasn't wrong. The whole situation had taken a toll on me financially and emotionally, but I'd survived it and I'd come out stronger on the other side. If I could use that experience to help other people, then maybe it hadn't all been for nothing. Patricia Wellington was released on parole in April after serving 2 years of her 4-year sentence. She moved out of state immediately, according to Emily, who still kept in touch with me occasionally. She'd gone to live with a sister in Oregon and was supposedly working at a grocery store and attending court-mandated therapy. I wished her well, in an abstract sort of way. I hoped she'd gotten the help she needed and found some peace, but I also hoped I'd never have to deal with her again. Life in Meadowbrook Estates continued peacefully. Linda Martinez served 2 terms as HOA president before stepping down, and David Kim took over after her. The HOA actually became a positive force in the neighborhood under their leadership, organizing community events and handling maintenance issues efficiently without the petty tyranny that had defined Patricia's reign. I proposed to Nicole on the anniversary of the day we met, which happened to be exactly 2 years and 1 month after the accident. She said yes, and we got married in a small ceremony in my backyard, with half the neighborhood in attendance. Linda and David were both there, and even Officer Rodriguez stopped by to offer her congratulations. "This is much better than the first time I met you," she joked, "standing around an accident scene in the middle of the road." "Agreed," I said. "Though if you'd told me that day that I'd end up here, I never would have believed you." "That's life," she said. "You never know where the road is going to take you." Looking back on everything that happened, I realized she was right. A random Tuesday morning accident with an entitled HOA president had completely changed the trajectory of my life. It had cost me money and stress, and more than a few sleepless nights. But it had also taught me to stand up for myself, connected me with people who became genuine friends, and given me a purpose beyond just showing up for work every day. I never did put reflective tape on my truck. It became something of a running joke in the neighborhood. For my birthday, Nicole gave me a roll of reflective tape with a bow on it. I laughed and stuck it in the garage where it stayed. My new Chevrolet Silverado sat in my driveway, unmolested and unfined, a symbol of everything I'd fought for and won. Every time I looked at it, I remembered that HOA Karen who crashed into my truck and then tried to bill me for not having reflective tape. I remembered standing up to her, fighting back, and refusing to be bullied. And I remembered that sometimes, even when the system seems stacked against you, justice can prevail. It just takes courage, persistence, and maybe a really good security camera. The end.